Welcome to the selected ones. The rarest souls are never forgotten. They are mishandled by people who mistake heavenly riches for spare coin. Let that sink in for a moment, because what we're about to reveal isn't a mistake. It's a cosmic blunder that someone will regret for the rest of their lives. You know, psychological research demonstrates that we do not dread losing others. We are concerned about losing access to the version of ourselves that exists only in their presence. And if you were that person, the soul that made them feel secure, protected, and magical, believe me, they did not just lose a connection. They lost the one person who had pulled their greater selves out of hiding. What's crazy is that they believed they were dumping a nobody, but instead they mishandled a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One who spoke with generational healing, silenced with divine knowledge, and wore spiritual armor disguised as tenderness. Now they're whirling, stuttering, and spiritual, Googling how to reclaim the chosen one like it's a customer service hotline plot twist. It is unconnected. So brace up, because in this video, we'll reveal what actually happened, why they botched you, what made you too rare for their grasp, and why losing you was not their worst error. It was never acknowledging who you were in the first place. Let us chat about it. First and foremost, they were not intimidated by your imperfections. They were afraid of your latent strength. They did not abandon you because you were too emotional, too silent, passionate, or difficult. That was the tale they told themselves, and maybe others. But the reality is far deeper and more painful. They did not abandon you because you were defective. They departed because they saw the power inside you and realized they couldn't handle what was going to happen. You were not out of control. You were just out of their control. People frequently accept potential as long as it is immature and reliant. But as your light begins to spread beyond the boundaries they attempted to impose on you, it reveals what they are not. Your clarity compels people to face their perplexity. Your development highlights their stagnation, and your confidence begins to flame holes in their anxieties. So they bail to preserve their ego. They blame you. You were in the process of blossoming, and they misinterpreted your changes for pandemonium. They observed you going through growing pains and assumed it was instability. However, growth is never elegant. Transformation isn't always attractive. You weren't falling apart. You were losing layers that they were never supposed to see. And instead of accompanying you through that miraculous process, they panicked and fled. Because they knew what you were going to become. They understood they wouldn't be able to keep up. It was never about your weaknesses. It was about your increasing strength. It was about how your presence began to change rooms, and your words began to cut through falsehoods. The way you're quiet became more important than their whole personality. It scared them, because control is a narcotic, and you were their final hit. They did not reject you. They withdrew from the storm. Your magnificence was about to be unleashed. They didn't fumble you because you were missing anything. They mishandled you because you became someone they couldn't control, contain, or understand. Number 2, people mistook your emotional honesty for emotional instability since they had never encountered anybody so genuine. They labeled you unstable because you felt profoundly and talked from your heart rather than hiding behind screens. Because when anything hurt, you spoke out. When things seemed odd, you brought this up. You were not dramatic. You were emotionally proficient. However, those who are accustomed to hiding their emotions or pretending to be calm in order to withstand your honesty sense turmoil. They were unaccustomed to someone who really meant what they said, which worried them. They had no idea how to deal with someone who grieved without shame, laughed freely, and questioned things that didn't make sense. You were not unpredictable. You were simply genuine. In a culture that rewards individuals for being numb and detached, they were scared. You weren't out here blasting, you were expressing. However, they were so accustomed to individuals bottling things up or playing it cool that when you brought your complete emotional self into the room, they mistook your depth for threat. They didn't feel uncomfortable because you were broken. They were uncomfortable because you refused to fake it. They didn't know how to cope with someone who listens to their inner voice, speaks out, and refuses to shrink in order to make others feel better. That amount of presence functions as a mirror, and most people aren't ready to see themselves in it. So they labeled you as extremely sensitive, emotional, not because it was true, but because it made them feel protected from what you were reflecting back to them. You showed them what it's like to live without the mask. You demonstrated what it is to feel totally. And not everyone liked that level of intensity, not because it is bad, but because it needs them to level up as well. They did not fumble or make a mess. They stumbled across someone with the bravery to turn up, raw, honest, and alive. You were the kind of genuine person that others just pretend to be. Number 3, they felt you needed them. You were just patient enough to see whether they would develop. They assumed you were holding on because you had no other options. They assumed you relied on them emotionally, psychologically, and maybe financially. What they didn't comprehend was that you were just giving them time. It is time to rise. It's time to develop. It was time to become a version of oneself that matched where you were going. You were not stranded. You were watching and observing, hoping they'd mature into someone you wouldn't have to leave behind. That's what hurts the most. Not the rejection, treachery, or disdain, but the recognition that they had the opportunity to develop with you, and they squandered it. You granted them access to your process. You did not just provide affection. You provided alignment, vision, purpose, and spiritual elevation. But they were too preoccupied with judging you by looks and ego-driven standards to see the opportunity standing in front of them. They misunderstood your commitment for a lack of choices, not comprehending that it sprang from self-awareness rather than desperation. You had alternatives. You had folks observing you. However, you were not chasing flashes. You were investing in something you believed might become a reality. They had no notion you were running on grace rather than necessity. They mistook your presence for authorization, unaware that your energy had an expiry date. The reality is, you could have walked away long before they attempted to make you feel disposable. But you didn't. You provided space. You provided patience. You offered them several opportunities to realize their full potential. They wasted it. They fumbled someone who was not waiting because they were weak, but because they were driven by mission rather than performance. Now that you've regained your vigor, they're realizing it's too late. They are recognizing you aren't circling them. You were measuring them, and the verdict is in. They could not meet the standard. They lost someone who never pursued them, just looking to see whether they may be picked again. Number 4, they misunderstood your seclusion for loneliness, unaware that you were being polished rather than discarded. They assumed your silent seasons indicated you were losing. They saw you alone and concluded you didn't have anybody. They observed your withdrawal. Stay low and cut them off. They laughed. They murmured that you were sliding off. You had no support, and you were becoming unimportant. However, their perspective was tainted by ego and ignorance. They didn't realize that seclusion for someone like you is not a breakdown. It's a restart. It is holy ground. It's where the noise fades and the soul becomes loud. They had no idea you were withdrawing so you could reconnect with your mission without interruption, that you were purposefully creating space, not because you were empty, but because you were about to be full. They mistook stillness for defeat, but it was really your shelter. They assumed no one wanted you around, whereas in fact you were being concealed for safety, elevation, and preparedness. You were not being rejected by anybody. You were being steered by God. They could not view the interior work. They didn't notice how your mentality shifted. They could not feel the weight you were losing. They didn't realize that every day in that alone, your vision grew clearer, your boundaries became sharper, and your tranquility became unavoidable. You were not avoiding the world. You were recovering from it. You were not fleeing from anybody. You were jogging with a purpose. So when they mishandled you, they didn't just abandon someone who was lonely. They walked away from someone who had just been in a spiritual lab, having every aspect of their identity revised and reaffirmed. They departed amid the stillness and will regret it. When the loudness of your hit begins to shake rooms, they are unable to enter. They misunderstood your calm for a nothingness. What they didn't realize was that you were sitting in the eye of your own storm, becoming the version of yourself that no one would ever mistreat again. Number 5. They took stock of your life without realizing the worth of your soul. They looked at what you did not have and assumed they did. You figured out they didn't have a nice automobile, a degree from a prestigious university, a million followers, or a blue check in their head. You were simply irregular, nothing amazing or noteworthy. And that's where they went wrong. They used man-made measurements to quantify something divinely created. They assumed that worth was simply apparent. They never asked what you were carrying that couldn't be seen. They never questioned how you were able to stand after all you went through, how you continued to show up with love, clarity, and wisdom even while going through hell. They saw an ordinary existence, but they had no idea they were standing in front of someone with ancient resilience, unusual insight, and unshakable favor. Things no resume can ever include. You weren't just doing a job or pursuing a passion. You were carrying generations of agony, courage, and accomplishment on your back. You carried suppressed voices before you and light to guide those who followed you. That is not something you wear. That's what you are. But they couldn't see it because they'd been conditioned to only do what's legal, labeled, and lucrative. They never questioned how you help people feel safer just by being there, or how your words might help unravel trauma. As if you were speaking straight to the soul. They failed to recognize the significance of your presence because they were unable to quantify it. So they deemed your fundamental background irrelevant. However, they rejected an asset that their lives may never recover from. They fumbled with a walking gateway. Someone who, without even attempting, transforms reality, gives clarity, and shines light into dark places. They took inventory of your automobile, clothing, and titles, but not of your spirit or soul. They observed the surface but missed the content. They held celestial treasure in their hands, but misunderstood it for rubbish. And now that loss will haunt them. Number 6. They mocked you when you were in survival mode, but never questioned how you survived. They felt your hardships made you weak. They glanced at your worn-out shoes, weary eyes, and quiet attitude, and saw someone to mock and talk about. They didn't inquire how much it cost you to get through the day. They didn't care about the burden you were carrying or the sacrifices you were making just to exist. They saw your suffering as entertainment, a joke, something to mutter about and exploit to enhance their own weak egos. However, while they were laughing, you were studying. They mocked your losses. You were perfecting the skill of getting back up without praise. What they didn't realize was that each setback taught you how to move in quiet, sense energy, and feel your way through the dark without flinching. You weren't just surviving. You were being honed, calibrated, conditioned by heavenly fire, to become someone who cannot be broken by what once destroyed you. They felt you were slipping behind, but you were only being stripped of your illusions. They assumed you had nothing going on, yet you were being taught by life itself. No textbook can deliver this type of information. You learned to recognize falsehoods by their vibrations, fake love by the quiet it left behind, and danger, smiles, and serenity in your own presence. They laughed at your training ground. And now that you're on the rise, they're beginning to worry because the version of you who suffered was never the finished product. That was merely a blueprint. The survivor version of you failed to impress. It came to reform, break generational curses, and create without permission to safeguard what is important. Never look back. They fumbled someone who did not pursue vengeance because they became too strong to spend time proving anything. You do not want to be repaid. You are the result. And now they realized the person they mocked could see through them the whole time. Number 7. They let down the one person who could have kept their secret secure because they were addicted to treachery. They had someone who would have supported them through the most difficult stages of their narrative, but they decided to risk. You were the only one who noticed the chaos beneath their picture and did not blink. You saw the terror behind their rage, the insecurity behind their confidence, and the scars underneath their deception. And still you remained. You were not there to expose them. You were there to help them confront themselves. You were not interested in exploiting their secrets. You were attempting to assist them recover from them. However, they couldn't trust something they didn't comprehend. They were so used to treachery games and superficial allegiance that your depth seemed questionable. Your constancy seemed strange. They mistook your protection for weakness and your quiet for acquiescence. They were accustomed to being liked only when they performed. But you liked them for their silence, imperfections, and chaos. And it terrified them more than hatred ever could. Instead of rising to meet such exceptional devotion, they let their ego to take control. They allowed temptation to triumph. They made turmoil seem like home. You were proposing a holy, binding, and unbreakable commitment. However, they chose treachery because it is what they have always known. They believed that undermining something genuine would give them power. But all it did was reveal how empty they really are. When love moves away, people no longer have a secure haven. The mask is breaking, and the falsehoods are catching up. And the one person who would never have used their truth against them has vanished. You were their vault. They could have placed anything they were embarrassed of there, knowing it would never be hurled back at them. They betrayed that trust, however, in order to get short-term affirmation and a transient ego boost for drama. They believed they could handle. They did not just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone who protected them spiritually, emotionally, and energetically. And now they're left vulnerable, with no one left to notice them and remain. It wasn't simply a relationship. They fumbled. That was their final chance for atonement. Number 8, they put their guilt onto you and were surprised when you recovered without them. They wanted you to be upset, not because they cared about you, but because your sorrow helped them feel less bad about what they did. As long as you were bitter, furious, and broken, they may convince themselves you were simply overly emotional or that you weren't over it yet. That story helped them sleep at night. It allowed them to pretend they weren't the villain and that you were just emotional, unstable, or hard to please. So when you stopped sobbing and began shining, it perplexed them. When you did not seek vengeance, did not publish cryptic comments, or attempted to prove a point, they didn't know how to handle it. Your article spoke louder than any argument you could have presented. They expected a breakdown, but you delivered a breakthrough. They mistook your stillness for defeat, when in fact it was healing. You weren't planning vengeance. You were re-establishing your self-worth. You weren't aiming to tarnish their reputation. You were recovering control. That's what shook them, because they knew. They gave you every cause to be resentful, and you still picked better. You choose growth. You selected alignment. You opted to become someone whose life was unaffected by theirs. They didn't expect you to climb without having to bring them down. They imagined their absence would freeze you, and their treachery would shatter you. But all it did was remove your illusions and remind you of who you were all along. You realized you never needed their acceptance, affirmation, or apologies. You provided the last piece of the puzzle. They fumbled with someone unusual, someone who understood exactly what they were doing, how they lied, how they distorted things, and then decided not to react. You did not want to be repaid. You want serenity. And now they're troubled by the idea that you recovered on your own, became entire without their assistance, and never looked back. They lost the one person who could have buried them, but decided to forgive instead. That is a level of power they will never comprehend, and a loss they will never recover from. Number 9. They were never prepared for the repercussions of mistreating a soul with cosmic power. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They treated you like an average person, someone they could manage, break, or abandon with no repercussions. But they overlooked one key detail. You have a cosmic authority that does not seek permission to act. You aren't merely a spirit roaming aimlessly. You are a force that moves with divine intent. That purpose is built into the fabric of existence itself. When they attempted to humiliate you, reality reversed the script. What was intended to shame you became the limelight, revealing their real colors. Their lives did not bury you. They dug their own grave. Their efforts at manipulation and control failed to bend your will. They unraveled their plans. You didn't have to raise a finger in retaliation because the cosmos is a master of balance, and it reacts to whatever energy you emit. They assumed they were playing chess while you were playing checkers. What they didn't realize was that your movements had already been pinned in a cosmic playbook that they would never be able to access. Every underestimation, every insult, every betrayal. They unwittingly ignited powers beyond their understanding. Forces that never forget do not forgive easily. Don't overlook a single thing. When they mishandled you, they started a chain reaction. Doors started to shut for them. Masks began to slip, and alliances that they believed were solid crumbled. What they attempted to use against you reacted like a boomerang, stronger and more accurate. You do not have to demonstrate your strength. You do not have to yell or seek vengeance. Your strength is the peaceful certainty that comes from knowing you're protected by something bigger than their plans. And this protection is not passive. It's dynamic, strong, and unrelenting. They misjudged the implications of mistreating someone with your level of supernatural support. They assumed it was just a game. But for you, this is a cosmic judgment. And right now, the scales are tilting, and it's their undoing. That's unavoidable. Number 10, they believed they had time. But you were their last grace period. They thought there would always be another opportunity, another tomorrow, to repair what they had broken. They regarded your presence as if it were an unbreakable safety net, a seemingly limitless grace period. But you weren't simply a fallback option or a quick consolation reward. You were the last pause. The last pause before everything got out of hand. Every relationship, every link, has an unseen limit at which compassion ceases and consequences begin. You were that deadline for them. You were living evidence that redemption isn't free or simple. They had time, but they squandered it taking you for granted. Like a forgotten gift. They thought your forgiveness was unrestricted, your tolerance unlimited, and your endurance limitless. You didn't simply stand there passively. You were creating room for people to wake up, make better decisions, and break the loops of their history. You were the calm center of the storm. They didn't see it coming, but they viewed you as a mistake, a burden and a nuisance. And that's when they squandered their best opportunity for freedom. Now, the cycles from which they should have fled are closing in like shadows. The lessons you taught, the limits you established, and the opportunities you provided. They were not just random acts of compassion. They were lifelines. And they decided to let go. They didn't just lose you. They lost the one item that may have changed their story. The opportunity to quit repeating misery, break destructive habits, and enter a new world. They believed they had time to reform, heal, and evolve. But the clock ran out, and you were the last warning light. They overlooked their inability to respect you. This isn't simply a personal loss. It is a cosmic consequence. Because after the final grace period expires, what follows is inescapable. They gave up their departure and are now caught in the cycles from which they might have escaped, all because they mishandled the one person who had the key, a number. They saw you as a backup plan, not understanding you were the blueprint. They treated you like you were simply an option, a stopgap until something better came along. They viewed you as a backup plan, someone to fill in the blanks when nothing else was available, never pausing to realize that you were the blueprint itself. They want bright diversions, fast remedies, and surface-level excitement. They pursued things that gleamed but had no depth, assuming that more noise equaled greater worth. But you weren't meant to be replaced or sidelined. You were the original design, meticulously crafted, purposefully layered, and intended to withstand storms they never saw coming. You had integrity built into your core, which many misunderstood for stubbornness or resistance. They termed it dull or ordinary, but it was really the template for meaningful development and long-term transformation. While pursuing glittering enhancements that ultimately lose their luster, they strayed away from the firm ground under their feet. They sought a rapid solution, an easy high, something that took their attention away from the important tasks. But in the process, they tossed away something that may have improved their whole existence. Your steadfast presence, insight, and genuineness. You weren't here to impress with hollow promises or flashy thrills. You came here to develop something genuine. They couldn't see it because they were blinded by the allure of illusions. Is it true that they failed to comprehend this? More does not equal elevation. It stems from respecting the design, plan, and original integrity that binds everything together. They bungled a unique kind of foundation, thinking it for just another piece of their jigsaw. And now that they've lost the blueprint, they're left attempting to recreate with scattered parts, never understanding that the masterpiece they once possessed was you. A number. They believed their rejection would shatter you, but it was really the ultimate unlock. They were certain that pushing you away, locking their doors, and turning their backs would fracture you into pieces. They believed that their rejection would quiet your voice, break your soul, and keep you imprisoned in the same spot. They didn't realize that their cold shoulder wasn't the end. It was a spark. Their discharge was like severing the final link that held you back. It was not a loss for you. It was freedom. The exact thing they attempted to use as a weapon became your launch pad without their permission or presence. You discovered a place to breathe, develop, and finally hear your own truth without interruption. They fumbled when you needed them most, not because you relied on them, but because their absence was precisely what your spirit longed for. It was the shove that broke open doors you didn't realize were locked. Their rejection did not shatter you. It unlocked you. It's strange how those who want to bring you down often become unknowing catalysts for your breakthrough. Their inability to keep you near and trust in you was the last component required for your destiny to materialize. You didn't break apart when they left. You came together in ways they never expected. You found strength in isolation, power in stillness, and clarity in the place they had abandoned. So, although they believed they were striking a lethal blow, they instead delivered you the key to the next level. They squandered not just your opportunity, but also their own. And now they're left watching from the sidelines as you seize the freedom they never expected. A number. They regarded you as a danger, not a benefit, since your brightness revealed the darkness in them. They did not fear you because you challenged their ego or authority. They frightened you because your brightness exposed the layers they badly wanted to hide. It was not about you pointing fingers or calling people out. Their own reflection, unfiltered and genuine, unnerved them. Your presence was a mirror that they refused to look into. You have a unique energy that did not follow their laws. It was genuine, unshakable, and unyielding. This highlighted the flaws in their carefully constructed facade. Your clarity did not embarrass them. It just revealed the aspects of themselves that they were too terrified to confront. The anxieties, falsehoods, and compromises. They couldn't hide from them while you were present. So, rather than face their own darkness, they decided to reject you, push you away, and dim the light that made them uncomfortable. They didn't reject you. They rejected the truth you represented. They wanted to keep the familiar illusions that held them trapped, even if it meant losing a blessing that may have aided their development. They misinterpreted their fear for control, believing that by turning down your light or shutting you off, they might shield themselves from change. But in doing so, they merely pushed themselves further into the darkness they dreaded. They fumbled the one person who wasn't there to reveal their flaws with brutality, but with a purity that required honesty first from themselves, then from the outside world. Their loss is not only yours, it is theirs. Because, while you continue to glow and rise, others stay trapped in darkness, unable to walk into the light you so easily carry. A number. They mishandled you because they were spiritually bankrupt and you were their last debt. They treated your spirit like an ATM, always extracting but never depositing. They grabbed your energy, knowledge, and emotional effort without hesitation, as if your soul had an infinite supply. You gave and gave, feeding their wars, soothing their concerns, and illuminating their path after their own flame had long gone out. When their own power failed, you served as an emotional lender and backup generator. You bore their weight, absorbed their grief, and provided clarity when they were confused. But they never stopped to replenish your tank. They never inquired about your well-being or expressed gratitude for your presence. Instead, they thought your supply was limitless, and that was their fatal error. Because every account has a limit, and every soul needs care. You continued giving until the cosmos said, "That's enough." It wasn't resentment or vengeance. The equilibrium was being restored. When they refused to renew your spirit, the universe terminated their account. Their emotional overdraft resulted in unexpected consequences. While others are left exhausted, empty, and desperate, you are entering a period of heavenly excess, with an abundance of energy, knowledge, and calm that cannot be taken or stolen. You are prospering in a currency they never valued, going on without the debt they left behind. They bungled the one who held the final loan, the one who might have become their most valuable asset if they had recognized the need of reciprocity. They are now completely insolvent. They won't understand how you develop riches in a spiritual economy. They made the worst mistake of their life when they mishandled you, because they failed to see that you were never simply a person to be misjudged or dismissed. You were a natural force with untapped potential and divine design. Every blunder they made against you simply tightened the threads of your goal and reinforced the armor that surrounded your spirit. They assumed they were dealing with someone frail, disposable, or broken, but they were really dealing with a spirit forged in the flames of adversity. They could not even begin to comprehend. Their stupidity cost them more than just one relationship or connection. They passed up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to learn from someone with cosmic power and spiritual insight. They squandered the blueprint that might have transformed their whole lives, misunderstanding your steadiness for complacency and your quiet for vulnerability. But as they fought to maintain their illusions, you were silently unlocking the next level of your destiny, fueled by a strength that goes beyond the ordinary. The fact is that what they regarded as your demise was your ultimate emancipation. Their rejection did not mean the end. It was the start of a huge new horizon in which you could unleash your entire potential without their meddling. They wanted you to remain damaged so they could relieve their own guilt. But you healed on your own terms, becoming a living example of perseverance and grace. And now, while others sink in the aftermath of their spiritual bankruptcy, emotional overdraft, and misdirected anxiety, you ascend in heavenly excess, entire and unstoppable. They bungled a soul that was too rare to replace, too bright, too faint, and doomed to be stopped. So use this as a warning to anybody who ever underestimates the chosen ones. Mishandle us, and you don't just lose a person. You initiate a cosmic reckoning. You unleash forces that do not forget, do not forgive readily, and do not let the fallen walk away undamaged. You were never their backup plan, interim solution, or safety net. You were, and always will be, the blueprint for something bigger. And the cosmos is watching, ready to tilt the balance and rewrite the tale in your favor. They fumbled you. Yes, but in that blunder, they kindled both your and their growth. It is the start of a legacy they will never forget. If you found this message to be meaningful, please subscribe and join our community of awakened souls by liking this video. Please leave a comment below to share your own experiences or views. I want to hear your tale. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please forward it to them. Together, we become stronger, smarter, and more unstoppable. Stay tuned because the trip is just beginning. God bless you. Bless.